if you go ahead and turn to chapter 18, I'm going to be rereading a few verses I read last time because they can be used in two different contexts. And last time I talked, we were looking at how Jonathan and Saul contrasted in their reaction to David entering the court. Well, we're going to continue on with Saul because his actions I talked about last time lead on further with what I'm going to be talking about this time. I'm only going to read a few verses tonight, and I'll let you all read the rest as I go. So we'll start in verse 8. And Saul was very angry, and with this saying, and this displeased him. They have described to David 10,000s, and to them thousands, and what more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. The next day a harmful spirit from the Lord rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre. As he did this by day, Saul had a spear in hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed from him his presence and made him a commander of thousands, and went out and came before the people. And David had succeeded in all of his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. When Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fear of all for him. But all of Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came before them. Heavenly Father, I come to you tonight, and just looking at this history and getting from it what you want us to. Lord, I pray that what I say is not my own, but what you want this message to deliver. Lord, just be with us as we go and read through this. In your holy name I pray. Amen. So I'm going to be talking through the rest of chapter 18. But I wanted to focus here because as I spoke last time, this was the point of no return. Saul had made mistakes. Saul had disobeyed God, and Saul had abandoned God, for lack of better terms. But this was the point where he was gone. And we see his direct actions of the harmful spirit of the Lord on him. And there was always the big question, why would God send a harmful spirit? It was a punishment. Saul had disobeyed God, and so this would be Saul's punishment, his due for disobeying. And so, the whole point of what I'm getting at is, we're going to be talking about today, is Saul's fear of David and how David reacts. We see when his first harmful spirit affects Saul, David is there playing the lyre. And you have this great contrast of David with the lyre and Saul with the spear. David is here giving relief, giving peace to Saul. Saul is beyond that. And so he hurls the spear at David in an attempt to kill him, to pin him to the wall. He wants David dead. And David dodges, he evades it. Saul does not get him. So maybe David's thinking, maybe the first time it's accident, he was just messing around. Second time, fool me once, shame on it's fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. The second spear goes to prove that Saul's intent. If it was just once, I don't think it would be in the Bible, but it was twice. Saul was intent. But what this also does show is that Saul tried killing David on his own. The rest of the chapter, Saul knows he can't do it on his own anymore. Saul can't be the one to give the killing blow. And we see in verse 12, he was so afraid of David because the Lord was with him. I mentioned this when I was talking about the Lord being with David when he was fighting Goliath, but perhaps Saul remembers the Lord being with Samuel. Because it's very clearly explained from earlier chapters that Saul and Samuel were, if they weren't friends, they were great acquaintances. They were on the same team, and it only fell apart in the later years. So Saul knows what it looks like when you have a man filled with the Spirit following the Lord. And he sees this young boy with the knowledge of, oh, I'm going to be usurped eventually. And he sees him with the Lord working with him. He is afraid of what this boy represents. He is afraid of what will happen because of this boy is here. And I believe at this point, Saul knows David's the one that's going to take his spot. He doesn't know when, he doesn't know how, but he knows it's David. And so he was afraid of him. So Saul knows that he can't be the one to kill David. So what does he do? He puts him as a commander over 1,000. He's going to get the Philistines to do it, which David learns from the worst, as we see in 2 Samuel. This is the same tactic David uses eventually. So Saul puts David in front of these men, these thousands, these warriors, and sends them out to fight the Philistines. Now this backfired for Saul, because what did it do for David? He accomplished. He was victorious. He won many of battles. And it just made Saul frustrated. And we see in verse 14, it's his success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. At this point, when you just give up, Saul doesn't, though. We see his frustration, his fear, his aggravation, especially when it continues to say that while he was fearful of them, Israel and Judea loved him. The only person who seemed to really not like David in all of Israel and Judea was the king. But in a certain twist of fate, the king was the only one who couldn't do anything about it. So Saul tried himself to kill David. He failed. Saul tried to get the Philistines to kill David. Wouldn't work. So he moves on to his next tactic, his misdirection, his manipulation. As we've read in when he fought Goliath, Saul said, "Whoever kills Goliath will be married to my daughter." Well, that was a promise that he had to fulfill. So in verse 17, we get this promise fulfilled. Here, and he gives his oldest daughter Merab, and all he asks is to be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. Saul really didn't see this as the Lord's battles. These lines are playing on David. Be valiant for me. Be valiant for your country. Be valiant for this kingdom. Also, fight the Lord's battles, not my battles, but the battles the Lord puts forward. This is Saul trying to manipulate David into doing what he wants. He's using David's strengths against him. He's using David's faith against him. But David doesn't fall for it. Who am I and who are my relatives, my father's clan of Israel, that I shall be son-in-law to the king? A lot of people look at this verse, and rightfully so, and see a humble David, and that's exactly what's going on here. But there's a sad part of this when you read Saul being crowned king. If you don't know that story, this is just the verse promoting David, which is exactly what it's doing. But it's also giving us a comparison of Saul before he became king. If you remember back, I apologize, I can't remember the chapter, but as they were drawing straws for who would be the first king of Israel, Saul had hidden away. Saul didn't, he had been promised this, but he was still a humble man who was, am I right for the throne? And this is why this verse particular to me helps reinforce the idea that you need to read Saul before David. Because that character of Saul matters so much when you see what he turns into. And you see, as I said here, I almost see a direct representation between the two, a comparison. Of Saul before he became king was very humble, wasn't big for flights of fancy. And then we have David here saying, who am I to be, not even just king, but to be the son-in-law of a king. So Saul here sees that this isn't going to work for David. He's not going to try to get his daughter to fault David. He's not going to use his first daughter to trap David into fighting these battles till he dies. It says that Merab would be given to David, but she was given to Edriel, the Mechalite, for a wife. That could be a throwaway, not to say throwaway verse, but it could be an explanation verse. But I was reading online from one commentary that was perhaps this was a ploy from Saul to aggravate David, to enrage David, by taking away something that was rightfully his. Because in history, usually the first daughter is the first to be married off. And David was promised to be married to the king's daughter. Even though he doesn't feel worthy, that is still his right by what Saul had promised. And so Saul taking that away, as I said, could have been a ploy to make David crack, to make David fall to where he could push him out and take blame. Of course, that doesn't work, so he moves on to his next step. And in verse 20, we're introduced to Michael, which is very weird as a boy named Michael reading about a female Michael in the Bible. It's been throwing me for a loop this whole time. Now we see Saul's daughter Michal loved David. And they told Saul, all the things, and he was pleased, and this pleased him. Saul sees this ticket to get into David, his daughter who loves David. While, yes, Michal does love David, I don't think it's for the right reasons. Because everybody loves David except for Saul. Jonathan loves David for the right reasons, but Michal probably loved him with fleshly desires. He was, one of the comments I read about David at this time was men wanted to be him, women wanted to be with him. So of course Michal would probably love David, but does she love him for his heart or for his looks? Now that's not quite described here, but we look early in the chapter. Jonathan loved David for his heart. They were knit by the souls together. So we have Saul's son who loves David's heart, and they are truly brothers in the Lord. But you have this comparison with his daughter who loves David. And I might be reaching a bit here, but it reads more that she just loved his flesh side. That he was handsome, that he was strong, he was virtuous. And so she loved that, but she didn't quite care. It doesn't say that she loved his heart for the Lord. As we continue on, let's give her to him, that she may snare him for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Saul knew something about Michal that's not explicitly stated in this verse, because he declares snare. And he didn't say that with his first daughter. So Saul sees something in his other daughter that has him to believe that she will be a downfall of David. And that's why he pushes forward. But even still, this whole marriage for Saul and David is a trap in and of itself, regardless of who the daughter being married is. As we, and the hand of the Philistines may be against him because, in verse 22, it told the servants instead of him, speak to David and say, in private say, behold, the king is delighted in you, and his servants love you. Now they become the king's son-in-law. And the servant spoke these ears into David, and David said, does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, since I am a poor man with no reputation? The trap Saul is setting here is the payment, the dowry that is paid between the man's family and the daughter's family. As in history, when it was always historical, the daughter would move into the wife would move in with the husband. But because in historical times, losing a member of the family meant you lost a pair of hands on the farm or in the shop or wherever, there was a dowry paid to kind of make up for that loss. That you do not have this person, so we're going to pay you in a sense so that you aren't as hit by losing this person. And even between a king and nations, the dowry still existed. So the trap Saul was setting here was, let's get David to have to pay this. Now Saul was king. He didn't need gold, he didn't need money, he didn't need jewels, he didn't need treasure. He wanted David dead. So the dowry that Saul wanted him to pay will be explained in a second. Actually, right here. And thus David, the king desires no bride price except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged of the king's enemies. Now, this might be a bit, this isn't taught in Sunday school per se, but the reason Saul wanted the foreskins of the Philistines was primarily to show that David got this from the uncircumcised. Because the Israelites were circumcised, so of course they didn't have any. And so it had to prove that David didn't get these off Israelites' bodies to make up for the loss. At the same time, it forced David to desecrate the bodies of the fallen Philistines. Because if you just kill a soldier and move on, that's war. If you take trophies, per se, from a body, that's disrespectful. So Saul's trap here was, I want you to kill 100 Philistines, and you has to be Philistines. You can't pull it from anywhere else. And 2, I want you to make the Philistines mad at you. Saul was forcing David to put a target on his back that the Philistines would come after him specifically. And so when the servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law. Before the time expired, David arose and went along with his men and killed 200 of the Philistines, and David brought their foreskins. So Saul had set this challenge to trap David unwillingly, to take control of the situation, make David the target. So David, with the Lord on his side, and in a lot of situations, it won't explicitly say David with the Lord on his side did this, but we know he was able to accomplish these things because the Lord was on his side. Went above and beyond. He took control of the situation. He wasn't going to do exactly what Saul demanded. He was going to go above and beyond what Saul had demanded or asked. So he brought him 200 of the foreskins, and that he might become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him his daughter for his Michal for the wife. But then when Saul saw that he knew the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. We see time and time again how pride is Saul's fault. He wanted to be the big man on the campus. He was. And this is the part that's a little bit frustrating reading this with 20/20 hindsight and knowing how historical kingdoms were. Saul was still, flesh-wise, the king of the castle, literally. And he couldn't accept anyone else, and that included God. And we see this as he fell. He started off praising the Lord, eventually saying, "The Lord, you're God," to Samuel. But we also see his tactics here. He's still a smart man. He still has his wits about him. Yes, he may be affected by the harmful spirit of the Lord, but he still knows his plans. He's still a good manipulator. Against a lot of other victims, this probably would have worked. If David didn't have the Lord on his side, he probably would have fallen to the Philistines. He probably would have even a worse target on his back and fall by everyone. So Saul just picked the wrong opponent. But in truth, there was no other opponent for him. And it's, to me, why it's important to understand Saul as a before and after is to see that he became your stereotypical Disney villain, but he wasn't in the first place. And it's very easy to see this in our lives as well. When you look at this person you know 20 years ago and you wonder what happened. Now, I'm not going to make any examples because I probably just said that and someone specific popped in your all's head. It really shows what can happen to a man who's acting with authority that he doesn't earthly deserve. Who shows a man who, I don't want to say lost their faith in God, but were never acted with the faith in God and just pretended. Compared to the man David, and this whole thing continues on through all of 1 Samuel. You see a man who had such great potential and a boy who had great potential, and you see what they do when they are given the option to follow the Lord or not follow the Lord. And it's not just, and these are, what I was trying to say there, is it's not just a random farmer in the middle of nowhere. These are people with authority, people with responsibility. And what they do with this responsibility when they don't put their faith in the Lord. Because Saul accomplished great things. He was a great commander. He was a great leader. He won battle after battle. But we see that his pride got in the way, and he wouldn't even accept his son's accomplishments earlier in 1 Samuel. When Jonathan had accomplished something great, Saul took credit. And even in this chapter, I didn't read it tonight, but they are praising Saul killed thousands, but David killed tens of thousands. Saul still killed thousands. And David was still Saul's general, so this pride just wiggled its way. But it also has another point of, I just thought about this, people who have authority, especially over God's people, become a big target for Satan. Because if you can take the headpiece down, everything else tends to crumble afterwards. And we even see this with Saul, as when he disobeyed, it led his soldiers to disobey. Saul put those people in position. But David follows, and he gets victory after victory after victory. But Saul can't take that. And Saul's manipulations fell short, and he realized just how impactful having the Lord on your side is. Now, is he going to be smart and stop? We'll read on and figure out. And just to give a closing, Saul's plan of making a target on David actually kind of worked. Because in verse 30, the final verse of this chapter, then the commanders of the Philistines came out in battle, and as often as they came out, David had more successes than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was highly esteemed. Do you ever do something, working on something, and things just get wrong? Like you break something and you try to fix it and it breaks even worse. You try to fix it and it breaks even worse. And you just have to take a moment and realize, maybe I shouldn't be the one to fix that. It's exactly what Saul's trying to do here. Saul's trying to discredit David. He's trying to ruin his image. He's trying to get David killed. And so his plot of getting the Philistines to target David, what does that do? It gives David the opportunity to have more victories over the Philistines. Once again, completely destroying Saul's plot. And it's kind of frustrating reading this with 20/20 hindsight, knowing that what happens, just like, Saul, you're not going to win. But pride is an evil thing. I grew up always saying, oh, I'm proud to do this, and have to take a minute to stop. Am I using the word pride correctly? There's a difference between having pride in the Lord and having pride of what you've done through the Lord, and saying, hey, Lord, you've done great things, and I'm glad to be a part of it. That's not what Saul is. He is pride as a man. Pride is flesh. And I don't think there's much of a better example in the Bible of pride getting in the way. And this is so, and I'll keep on harping on this until I finish this chapter. Reading those first chapters before David and Goliath, Saul had such potential. He was a great king, all things earthly considered, but he couldn't accept the fact that God was over him. Now that's a question of a lot of Christians. I mean, I even have trouble because I hate being told what to do. You can ask my parents back there. Can I take having God tell me what to do? And now this isn't, and I feel like a lot of Christians have this because you get your mindset on one thing. And you hear God say, I want you to do this. But you already put all your eggs in this basket. I mean, I'm in a similar situation right now where I'm trying to figure out what God's trying to tell me to do, and I don't want to put too many eggs in one basket just yet. Are you okay with having God tell you what to do? If you're not, it's sorry, but you have to be. Saul couldn't. And we'll see him spiral further and further as he comes to the realization that the Lord is no longer with him. As he comes to the realization that this may be his own fault. But we'll also see with David what happens when you do follow through the Lord. David gets into some sticky situations. And there's no reasonable way a human could get out of that, but we see him do so. I love this book a lot more than I did when I started. I was talking with my uncle who's preaching down at Wooten that the New Testament's is fun and kind of easier to preach out because you're reading Jesus' words. You're reading his exact message. And coming from a preaching standpoint, it's easier to find a message to deliver through that. 1 Samuel is a bit harder. Now, first of all, you have David and Goliath. That's an easy one. I struggled with trying to find a message out of David marrying Saul's daughter. And this is my kind of call to you is just read the Bible, dive into it. I read as many versions as you can, find online resources. That's what I do. People smarter than me, more experienced than me, have been doing this for years, and I can easily miss stuff. But I'll just leave you with this question. Are you letting God guide you, or are you being prideful and getting in the way? Thank you.